Hey everybody, guess what time it is? It's time for Vito Ed's Dino. It's another week. It's another fun-filled conversation waiting to happen. My name is Vito Delsante. That guy's name is Dean Haspiel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dean Haspiel.
Dean, earlier on Facebook this week, you posited the question, which would you prefer, a pint of ice cream or a pint of beer? And I decided I was going to like show my vote with a pint of Corona. This isn't paid advertising. I'm not even going to say what it is. So, uh,
That's the
but
wrong answer. You know that, right? That is the wrong
Oh, I
answer.
love ice cream. Don't get me wrong, but nobody wants to see me with a spoon right now.
No, that's true. Unless you start spooning that beer, then there's a whole other thing
Oh,
going on.
that's another thing that would happen is you would start seeing it like just congeal on my
Oh God.
congeal.
Oh
Like
God.
you ever like see snot in the winter? Like that's what
Uh-huh.
it would look like.
Uh-huh. Snot in the Winter. That's a title of a play.
I think that was the
Um,
movie with Sean Connery, wasn't it?
Wait, was it a James Bond
No, it was
film?
Lion in the Winter, I think.
Snot in the winter. A rejected James Bond story, you know? Oh my Lord.
Uh,
I forget why I posited that question on Facebook, although I was having a tough time with this script that I have handed over to Don to take a look at, who we'll talk about momentarily. And it kind of helped me come up with an ending to a story, weirdly
okay.
enough. Like something was in the air, and ice cream won over beer in my part of the world. So
You
how about
know,
them?
it would win over this part of the world too. Uh, Before we get to our special guest for the evening, I have to remind everybody of our special guest to my left. Yeah, the rabbit is still here.
Yes.
His name is Chubby, and he likes to eat dandelions.
Wow. And he's got enough space and he's happy and getting cuddles and all that.
Yeah, we're building him actually a pen outside. Michelle's actually working on it as we speak. But
Oh,
right now, he's kind of in a little enclosure right now, just to until we get ready to transition him. But he's got plenty of water, plenty of food. Like we're loving up on him.
oh,
So yeah, he's doing well.
that is awesome. Once we introduce our guests, we'll explain to the guests what you're talking about, the
Yes.
context.
So let's introduce our guest, our special guest for the night. I'm very happy to say that he hails from the same part of town that I do, or at least part of the country that I do. Don Edward Simpson. I don't know why we're calling him Edward, using his full government name, Dean. But Don Simpson is a legendary independent cartoonist and near mythological freelance illustrator, most noted as the creator of Megaton Man, Border Worlds, and Bizarre Heroes. He's also currently freelance, not currently, he's also freelance for nearly every major comic book publisher and is currently known for publishing an Iranian cartoonist in the pages of his new Kickstarter, Megaton Man Multimensions. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Don Simpson.
Woo!
Hello,
There he is.
hello.
It's
Are we on yet? I'm listening to Jesus Christ Superstar. Are we still? Oh, hey,
we're on.
I have. Speaking of Three Rivers Comic
Hey,
Con, Vito, did you make off with any of the
no, because I never get to go
Golden
to the
Age Megaton?
I never get to go to the brewery or whatever, the party where they do that because it's always the day before. But I gotta get John to send me a couple of those because I need one. Not to drink.
That's where we met. That's where Vito and I met. And every
Yes.
year, Todd McDevitt does a collector's label. John Engel got the original artwork, much to Todd's dismay. But every year they do a feature artist. I've never tasted because I don't drink beer, but I don't drink. I don't drink. It just, and I've got a head cold, but alcohol I have an adverse reaction to, sinus wise.
Yeah.
But it's
You're
a
better off, Don.
valued collector's item.
Yeah.
Hey,
Every
Dean,
Did did
and
that say
Dean, I
Woo
met.
Brew? Did that say Woo Brew on it? Wow.
good.
You gotta love
And
that, man.
this is the golden age Megaton Man. This was the
Whoa.
World War II Uncle Farley.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
and there's a nice yellow plastic cap.
Oh yeah, yeah. Hey,
So,
that's a good look.
uh,
Uh,
And Todd will still have a few cases of this at the next Three
Yeah,
Rivers.
I think he still has.
It might turn to syrup, but that's,
We won't drink it at that point.
or you could just put it on ice cream.
There you go.
I mean, there I go. See, did we mentioned the query, right, on our opening here, or is it before the opening, about what would you prefer, a pint of ice cream or a pint of beer?
Yeah, we mentioned it. Yeah, you had
Okay,
talked about
so
it.
I didn't mention that the ice cream would be, for me, I mean, it's clear that it's mint chocolate chip ice cream, of course.
Wait, time. Why is that clear? Like I've never seen you with a mint anything.
I like mint, and in fact, some people, and I understand this, sometimes don't like mint flavored food like candy, whatever, because they feel like it tastes like toothpaste,
Sure.
you know. But and then of course that gets into my head. I'm like, am I tasting toothpaste or some mint flavor? But there's something about that. What's the candy? It's like looks like a silver dollar, and it's a mint pat. It's a mint patty,
Like
right?
a peppermint patty.
Peppermint patty, yeah. I used to crave those all the time as a kid.
Really?
I don't know why. There's something about the combination of chocolate and mint,
Mhm.
you know. And then when they make it cold and you get an ice cream out of it, oh my Lord, come on now, you know. And also, I'm not really a beer drinker. I was introduced to beer through Old English 800
That's not
uh,
beer.
charcoal filtered malt liquor,
Yeah,
right?
that's technically not beer.
So it's technically not beer, but then I kept thinking, is this what beer is? And then I would go rob banks after I would drink one. but but also I feel like beer just makes me feel bloated. I feel like every time I have a beer, it's like having a hamburger, and I like hamburgers, but I
Absolutely.
don't want to have 4 or 5 hamburgers in a row.
Yeah.
You know. So then I went to
Dean
whiskey.
Dean sits there at his table at Ithacon, and he has a big tube of Crest, and he takes little hits of it all day long.
Just to get him through the
It
day.
keeps him going.
I don't know why, but you just said that, and I was thinking that I'm sure there are some people in the world who put like a little smear of a mint, flavor or feeling
Well,
underneath their nose.
I'll tell you something. This could be a problem, Dean. My mother is of an age, and she's in a home, and they take away any kind of liquid lotions and toothpaste because they can be consumed by people who've forgotten
Who have
what
forgotten.
is
Oh
edible and
man.
now.
Yeah.
So
Oh
this,
boy.
if you notice this mint obsession starts to grow worse, and you start, you're like eating, mint cigarettes and
Mint steaks, and
mint
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 vegetables,
pizza and thing.
mint pizza. But then it also, just because I always make these connections. I was told, and maybe one of you guys or both of you guys know the answer to this. What is the first thing cops do when they enter the home of a dead person?
Oh, I don't know this. I've never been dead, nor have I ever been a cop.
You've never been dead.
No, I mean, there's days that I thought I was, but no, I don't know.
Don, do you know?
I don't know. They reach for their handkerchief and put it over their mouth.
Oh,
That's probably technically true. But what they do once they case the joint and they make sure that the oven is not part of the evidence, is they find the coffee can and they boil and burn coffee, because burnt coffee smell trumps the smell of death,
wow.
apparently, or at least helps
I,
relieve it.
I should try that in my apartment.
Oh God, the things we learn, the things we learn.
So
So
we should get
yeah,
into it, Dean. Go ahead.
well, I would love, at some point we're going to talk about Don's new Kickstarter.
Yes.
But before we get there, listen, no one has seen Don in 40 years, so he's kind of reemerged, after all this time, and suddenly it's like, oh, I have 10,000 pages of a comic book that, where'd those come from, right? So, and they came from his career, right? But the career started somewhere. And my question, and you've probably been asked this a million times, when I first discovered Megaton Man, which is you're most famously known for creating, I always saw as a cross between like Will Eisner and Mad Magazine. Is
Hmm.
that fair to say that like it was like spiritually?
Well, Eisner, I was under Eisner's influence for a brief time. I think Neil Adams was an influence. But my real influences were Gil Kane, John Romita Sr., John Buscema, and Jack Kirby, and
But we're
Joe
talking
Siegel.
illustrative. You're talking about the art styles. I'm talking about like the sensibility that kind of created this parody of a superhero, right?
So you're mean like cinematic storytelling and so forth. I guess I was in the early 80s, I was probably the most under that influence. If you look at my page layouts, they were pretty fractured and wild and irregular and so forth. So I guess I was thinking a lot of cinema, art house films, foreign films,
Mm-hmm.
classic Hollywood, and looking at Steranko and Eisner and anything that was offbeat, anything that I considered pushing the form and the boundaries. I was Victor Moscoso, Spiegelman's breakdowns,
Mm.
was anything that I thought would test the boundaries. And after the first couple of years in the business, and then I did Border Worlds, which was like a widescreen cinemascope. I was trying to think in those terms. But after that, I started to consciously dial it back to like a 6-panel grid or a 9-panel grid, like just a keep a consistent frame and then just concentrate on telling the story inside the frame. And you'll see when we collect all of especially the first volume of the complete um, Megaton Man. I'm going to hit my mute button quite a bit because
You're
I'm
you're a pro, man.
a little congested. Well, I've done a lot of videos where I haven't done that, so it's obnoxious. But so I consciously simplified and I consciously tried to force myself because if you look at Kirby, um, early Kirby, he was doing circular panels and, the just Simon Kirby stuff was all kinds of strange layouts and so forth.
Like
Innovation.
Kirby origami almost.
And, but then by these Marvel, did I freeze or did you freeze?
You froze.
But by the mid-60s, okay, that'll happen. I'm on wireless. The early Simon Kirby had a lot of experimentation in panel layouts, but by the mid-60s, Kirby was just doing like 4-panel Thor pages, 6-panel Captain America, and just telling the story inside the panel borders, not wasting energy trying to
Trying to reinvent the page every time. And it's funny you say that because as I've gotten older, obviously there's the 9-panel grid that Ditko liked to employ, that then later on Dave Gibbons employed in Watchmen, and has many other artists. And like you said, Kirby kind of like honed in on, I mean, the amount of pages he had to crank out, it was a lot per month, but also he found like a rhythm maybe. And I remember doing a Billy Dogma comic, where the constraint was square panels. No matter what I was trying to go for, whether it was a close up, a vista, looking left or right, up and down, whatever, it was square panels every time. And in a way, I learned a lot from that because of that restraint, or constraint. And I thought at some point, and I was doing it because I was putting it online first, and then I was collecting it in print. But whenever I do a comic in print first, I do think about how to vogue and go a little wild on the page, you know, just for the fun of it, maybe the fun of it for me more than the reader, but you can get into an area where you're getting too clever for yourself, and it can almost be a detriment. But part of the question I wanted to ask you about, what do you got there? Don is showing, oh, is that the
This is
an
a
homage
nine
to that?
panel. This is a 9 panel
Mhm.
And that is
page.
almost like an homage to the Captain America Batroc scene that Jack Kirby drew.
I was just thinking the same
It's kind
thing.
of famous. Yeah, you were thinking the same thing, Vito?
Yeah,
Yeah. I've actually
And
used
then
that in my own comics.
4
Then
panel.
there's the four
four
panel.
panel.
Yep.
So, but it's not just labor saving. It's really just focusing, choosing your battles, and young. I now I'm an old guy, so I see a lot of younger cartoonists who have. It's like you take a plate of glass and drop it, and it fractures, and then you draw them. That's your panel arrangement, and
Especially during the image years.
it can be. Um, it can be taxing on the reader to have a different schema every page. Every time you turn the page is a new obstacle course. It's a new
Right.
maze. So it's just a way of conserving energy and putting your energy into other things.
Let me ask you, you've always been super talented. Your rendering alone is incredible and perfect, obviously, for superhero genre as well as some other stuff. But right out the gate, did you decide just to be an independent cartoonist, or did you try to get Marvel and DC work?
No, I was a how to draw comics the Marvel way kind of boy. 1972. I fell in love with comics. I was 10 years old, and one of the first comic books I got was the Kirby's Jimmy Olsen's Superman in Supertown. We had a little reading corner in third grade. We had a little cubby corner with next to the pencil sharpener and the scratch paper. And we had a little bookshelf and a little carpeted area. It's one of the teachers brought in a stack of comic books, and they were all from the same month. They were like 6 or 12 copies of Lois Lane 221 or 219 or something, and Jimmy Olsen and some Gold Key comics and some Archie comics, and there were multiple copies. And at the end of the year, the end of the school year, the teacher said, we'll take these home. And so I took a copy of everything and I added it to my collection. I think I had a coverless FF 64 or something like that, the Sentinel.
Hmm.
And I had
Say the
a
Sentinel.
not brand Eck number 12 and a few things kicking around. But I had never, I think I bought a Gold Key Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea that was 12 cents. And it was like the difference between a 12-cent comic and a 15-cent comic book. But that was it. It was very sparse. But that summer, after I took those comic books home, I started reading comic books. I became addicted, and I wanted to be a comic book artist when I grew up at the age of 10. And here I am, 63, and I'm living the dream, and I'm thinking, doggone it, I should have wanted to be an astronaut. Maybe I'd be on Mars or something, something bigger. But
Apparently, you can be an astronaut for 10 minutes these days, supposedly. Yeah, but still, like,
but comic books, um, but I wanted to be a comic book artist,
yeah,
and this was this is something that I marvel at now, no pun intended, but it was very educational in terms of art, uh, because of different styles, and I would see. So I was getting new comics from 1972 off of the spinner rack, and I was getting coverless comics from the the mom and pop shop that had plastic bags, 23 for 25 cents. And I got like the Jim Mooney inking John Buscema Spider-Man with the Prowler, all kinds of stuff like that. So I was getting things, and treasuries were coming out. Not long after that was Origins of Marvel Comics, Son of Origins. So I was seeing a lot of stuff from the 60s on up through 72, 73, 74. But I would see all these different artists who drew the same set of characters, and I became mostly almost entirely a Marvel fan. And I would see that, Kirby and Sinnott did the best thing, and Romita did, Bill Kane and John Romita did the best Spider-Man, and John Buscema did the best Silver Surfer, even better than Kirby. So I would notice this, and I would think, well, why don't they just look at each other and see who's doing it the best, and just adopt the best practices? And I didn't have those terms at my disposal then, but I'm thinking, this is a 10-year-old kid, 11-year-old kid, thinking, why don't they just look? Isn't it obvious? And I thought, well, they must be too busy to, or they just, they have bad habits or something. Because John Buscema would draw, the thing, and well, who knows who would ink it, and it would look like wouldn't look right.
Mhm.
Only if Joe Sinnott inked it, it would look right. But I thought here, and this is the thing that astounds me, is that a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid thought, well, if they can't look at one another and pick the best and adopt the best practices, I can do that. I can look at all these different artists, and I can say, well, here's Wally Wood inking, doing Daredevil, and here's Steranko's Captain America, and I can take the best of all these different styles and inking techniques. And I did not have a complete understanding of how these things emerged onto paper. The idea of black and white, high contrast. How did they get it perfectly black and white? The outlines, I'm drawing in pencil and ballpoint pen and stuff, But I thought it was possible to take the best of different artists, and that carried forward beyond comic books. You mentioned Eisner and Neil Adams and Galassi and Frank Thorne, and there was a wonderful book by P.R. Garriock called The Masters of Comic Book Art, which came out in the late 70s. And it had Mobius, and it had Crumb, and it had Drouillet. We just saw Walt Simonson. He's talking about Drouillet was the biggest influence on him. And so all of these influences from until I graduated high school in 1980, I'm trying to absorb all these different influences, these conflicting, completely incompatible art styles, and trying to mesh them together. And like I've said before, I have a kind of a basis in how to draw comics the Marvel way. I have a kind of Romita, Kane, Buscema, Kirby kind of base to my approach. I have a lot of Jack Davis in my style. Jack Davis was appearing all the time on Time magazine covers.
Yeah.
More than Mad Magazine in the early 70s, and we get Time magazine in my house. We got the Detroit News. I grew up in suburban Detroit. I caught the tail end of Little Abner. I got a paperback of Little Abner. I waited and waited. I couldn't wait for Romita Spider-Man to appear in the daily newspaper. That was a big thing. So and Peanuts and Funky Winkerbean. We didn't have Doonesbury, so it was like Funky Winkerbean was like the junior high school version of Doonesbury. So, But all of those influences through, I graduated high school in 1980. I'm trying to blend them all together. And then after high school, and I had outgrown superheroes somewhere around 77, 78. And I was looking more at undergrounds, and I was looking at the Garriock book. I was looking at heavy metal. I met Keith Pollard. I had to have been able to drive. So I was like 16, 17 years old. I had my learner's permit, and I drive from Livonia, 6 Mile and Inkster Road in suburban Detroit down to Southgate to Keith Pollard's apartment. And he was penciling the Fantastic Four. I mean, that's like the biggest, like that's the job I wanted when I was 10. And then he's the next time I visited him, he was doing breakdowns for Spider-Man. I guess he was doing four at the, somewhere in there. And so meeting a guy that actually was doing what I wanted to do, and he would show me either his pencils, or he'd show me photocopies that he kept of his pencils. And here's Tony DeZuniga inking him on the Hulk, and here's Jim Mooney inking him on Spider-Man, and here's Joe Sinnott inking him on Fantastic Four, and here's Dave Hunt, and here's this guy, here's Joe Schmo that they gave it to, who walked in the door, some alcoholic inker they gave it to. And I'm thinking, well, I'm 16, 17 years old. I'm laboring over my pencils and my
Nope, he just froze.
paper, my ditto sheet. And I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, uh, I'm gonna sweat over my pencil pages and then send them to New York, and they might give it to Joe Sinnott. And Keith Pollard said, Joe Sinnott takes my stuff and turns it into art. And I don't think he didn't have as glowing, words for some of the other inkers he got. And you could just see, and quality control at Marvel in 1978, 79 was about the worst you could imagine. And not only had I outgrown superheroes, but it was just an appalling product. So I'm thinking, well, I still want to be a penciler, but do I want to be sending in my stuff and seeing it massacred? I knew myself well enough to think that I don't think I want to do that. So I started learning to ink, and I would come back to Keith and show him. And so I was doing like just visuals. And then he would say, well, this is great, but you're not leaving enough room for lettering. And I said, well, how do you know how much room to leave for lettering? You're working Marvel style, right? So we'll leave about a third of the room at the top. And if you want to just put empty balloons or something. So I went home and I tried that, and I didn't like that. So I started lettering something in the balloons. So now I'm an auteur, right? Penciling, inking, writing something because I have to, and I'm lettering something because I have to. And it's very crude, but that's how, it wasn't because like I've got to control my intellectual property and nobody can interfere with my artistic vision or anything. It was just, I just knew that I wanted to draw comics, and I had always come up with clever stories too. But I just knew, I'd love to be a penciler, but I'm thinking like Stan Lee down the hall is going to write beautiful, and Artie Simek is going to letter it, and Joe Sinnott's going to ink it, or John Romita or somebody. And I'm thinking, in reality, it's going to be, a crapshoot, and they're going to give it to Slavinsky's, somebody, and I don't think I could. I knew myself that I could not. And then it became the era of Jim Shooter, and I just became estranged from newsstand superheroes, and I was already looking at European comics and underground comics and kitchen sink reprints of The Spirit and Steve Canyon, and we were beginning to see more and more comic strip collections and so on. And so I didn't know where I was going to fit into what, but I aimed away from New York mainstream Marvel and DC. And so for a few years, I was just, I was reading breakdowns. I was reading the Comics Journal. Comics Journal in those days always had a story of David Anthony Kraft or Jan Sternad or somebody who had been terribly, horribly abused by the system, and they were never going to work again for comics, And so I was reading that kind of stuff. It was kind of like a support group for people who had outgrown superhero stuff.
But
So
Don,
that's
I was going to ask you, how did your influences were definitely, in your formative years are definitely moving away from superhero themed stuff, going into the more independent European or the underground stuff. How do you tail back to superheroes with Megaton Man then? Like where, is it just to be
well,
parody or
well, Megaton Man was the path back because Megaton Man, I could use all those influences, all those incompatible influences. And you can see it in the especially the first few issues. And you see it still. There's some panels that look like I'm channeling Jack Davis. Some panels I'm channeling Jack Kirby, and there's actually not a lot of difference between them. And some panels I'm channeling Gil Kane and Mobius and whatever. Um, but it turned out to be the perfect vehicle because it was a satire. I could ink, I could try out my Milo Manara inking. I could try out my Mobius inking. I could try pens. I could try brushes, stipple, all that stuff you see in the early issues, which you will see in the complete Megaton Man Volume 1 when it comes out this year. If a battleship on the high seas does not sink the freighter
yeah.
during the tariff wars. But in any case, yeah, it was Megaton Man was the perfect concept because it was so over the top, and it using all these different influences made it funnier. But it was also, I was just me, a laboratory trying to make all these things compatible and try to reconcile incompatible things, styles.
So it's odd because I'm obviously I'm learning this for the first time. Talking to you about it as is Vito, and I don't know if you discussed this in other interviews or in the past, but like it's so interesting to me that the young Don Simpson was like, those artists draw a better Spider-Man. Those artists do a better Fantastic Four, X-Men, Conan, whatever, Hulk. And then you're editing in your brain. Well, that person, every artist should learn the other artist's virtues or something in some way, right? And ultimately, what you're asking for is Ron Frenz hadn't started drawing comics yet. Like you're waiting for Ron Frenz to show up. But you're also, if I'm correct, I believe those early Marvel comics, everyone understood there was a quote house style, like it was either Ditko, Kirby, or not. Well, I don't know if Wally Wood would be thrown in there, to be honest. But who's the guy? Everett, maybe Everett,
Or maybe Don Heck.
and Don Heck, right? So, and then
Well,
maybe later on Gene Colan, right? But Gene Colan is like painting with pencil somehow. But then you go and you create the Megaton Man to reconcile kind of like this mandate that you had in your brain, and you're now putting proof in the pudding through this comic here, where you're drawing, you're breaking the same rules that you were commenting on in a way, right? Like you're flexing, European style to an American style and all over the place. So where are you going with that?
With an underground sensibility too,
Yep.
like with a Crumb.
I agree. Let's move to the next question. Now here, But it became even more fine grained than who draws the best webbing on Spider-Man. And I picked up somehow I got a copy of Ditko's Spider-Man number 30 from the kid around the block. The kid around the block was a couple years older, and he had some stack of like from like 64 to 69 comics. And it's 1972, 73. I could trade him two copies of some new comics for an old comic. So I got a Barry Smith shield, and I got a Steranko Captain America, the olive cover with the tombstone, and Rick Jones is at the base of the statue, and the Hydra's creeping out from behind the monument. And I got a Hulk, Marie Severin, the Steranko cover Hulk, giant king size. And what was the other you just mentioned? But so I was seeing examples of all these older comics, 5 year old. It's like 5 years old comics, and things that I had missed. And I don't think, incidentally, I don't think I ever read a complete story in those days. I somehow missed, like, it's continued next issue, and I would somehow not have. So that kind of channel switching, it's like you never get finality, you never get closure. It's just this ongoing.
Well, it's the unending story. Marvel and DC write the unending stories. They never end.
But aside from it went deeper. As I went from 11, 12, 13, 14, it got to the point of like, well, different artists have different ways of drawing fingernails and eyelashes, and it became more fine grained than just like, well, who does the best Doctor Doom, or that kind of ballpark. Who inks the best thing? It became who uses lighting, and who uses and who does depth of field, and I was also looking at a lot of film and photography. I'm going to museums and looking at everything from abstract expressionism back to archaic Greek things, everything. So I was trying to discover everything that had ever been done in art, everything that had ever been done in writing, et cetera, trying to learn the best things. And it went way beyond like who does the best kneecaps and stuff.
What drives you to do that though, Don? Like what is your, I don't want to say what is your ultimate goal, because obviously your ultimate goal is to make the best product you can, but why put yourself through that kind of mania? Like it seems like it could just open up a different can of worms.
A never-ending quest for perfection, Vito. It's got to come from within. Have you ever spoken to Howard Chaykin, for Christ's sake?
I've spoken to him.
Nobody says, hey, can you do a better, can you push yourself? I mean, there were artists who and there were examples of people. I think Gil Kane all through the 80s kept getting better. There were examples of artists who kept pushing. I've stopped pushing. I don't care anymore. I'm hacking it out. I've got they don't need. They're not looking at how many lines I'm feathering in there. So, but no, you want to get better. You want to get good at it, and that's all. That was why. Why did I? I don't know. Why does a 14-year-old kid want to get it right? What does that mean? You're sitting there trying to, get the webbing to align. You're putting this webbing all over this body, and you're trying. And I just recently did a piece. I got webbing all over this figure, and it's like, how do you get it to rationally line up and convey form and all this stuff? It's just there are some people who are trying to get better at it. it's an inner drive. It's as simple as that, and it doesn't pay, but that's as coward, But that's some people just want to get better at the craft, and they want to do it right. And if it takes 10 times, and if it takes hours of practice, I spent a lot of time studying Hogarth's dynamic anatomy, and then Moses, this guy, and other anatomy books and Jack Ham books, and that was what was so great about the Marvel, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. Just that short list, the bibliography of Buscema's, that got me started, and then the Bridgman books. Although Bridgman didn't impress me initially. I got the last Bridgman book is called The Human Machine, which it was just kind of this abstract, nonsensical. He was losing it then, but his earlier books make some sense, But in any case, all those anatomy books, there's been Dover's put out a number of reprinted things from earlier than the 50s that I've seen since. Looking at photographs, drawing the human figure in model situations, going to museums, looking at paintings and looking at drawings. I used to have enormous library of coffee table books. They're in storage now. Now you can see everything on this device. We're using the internet. You can zoom in on the Sistine ceiling and so forth. But all print, for the past 30 out of the last 40 years.
It's funny, Don. I remember when I met you for the first time last year at Ithacon, and did we lose you? Are you still there?
So you just try to get good at it.
All right, you're back.
And
you're back.
I froze. And so that was, if I could sum it up into one sentence, you just missed that. That was the perfect formulation. No, it's just you can see everything you want on the internet, so it's not necessarily a print-based library that you need. But I'm still accumulating. Oh, I wanted to show you this. So if we reach our stretch goals on multi-mentions, we're going to go to this format.
Oh my
This
God.
is have you seen this thing?
No. What is that?
I have a Fantastic Four edition that's that big of something.
God.
Yeah. What size? What's that called?
I don't know. It's called like Tombstone size.
Well, for our listeners, it's a giant Thor collection.
It's got to be
huge. It's like a door.
It is probably the size of 3 omnibus, like DC Absolute editions, or
they're giant
editions that Scott Dunbier did.
So
and Jim Dugan gifted me one that's a Fantastic Four one with Galactus, so it's like perfect for a Galactus story.
I haven't even opened it. This was Tom and Amanda Powers gave this to me. Tom and Amanda Stella Powers, and they got doubles like by accident.
Oops.
So they gifted me this, and it's in a bag, and I haven't even opened it. I'm afraid. It's like, good God, it's like Golden Age size artwork or something.
I think it comes with the original art.
But I've seen a lot of artists. I've seen a lot of it's like Kirby's ashes are mixed in with them. It's like a Kiss. It was like one of those Kiss magazines from the 70s.
With their blood.
Except it's Kirby's cigar ashes, I think.
Yeah, that's thanks for getting me out of that.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, but one of the things I was going to say, and when I met you for the first time, like I had obviously known about you forever, and you had kind of disappeared for a little while. And when I met you, I was like, on the one hand, when you talk, it's like you're wearing a monocle and an ascot, right? But to look at you, you're like some Pittsburgh mafia godfather gangster, like.
And he's from Detroit originally.
And he's from Detroit, so he could legitimately be terrifying. I mean,
yeah,
that's why you enter his apartment and you need to burn coffee because of the bodies are buried there, right? Like, but that's what I love about you is in a weird way you remind me of me, where like uh I look and behave kind of like a thug sometimes, but I do think about, and I have a heart like the three of us and everybody listening, and I am super sensitive, and like you put up this veneer so that you can get through life, but then the type of stuff that you're working on is you are kind of striving for a certain perfection, and I think you even understand the real truth about comics is that you're creating a shorthand. It's a shortcut to conveying story, through illustration. And it's just
what was
fascinating
the
to talk to
question?
you. Oh,
What
what
was the
was the
question
question?
again?
All right, the question is
Well,
actually here's the
let me
question.
address what you said.
Yeah,
Let me
address
address
that,
what
and
you
then
said.
I have a few.
You said on we just did another video plugging my project, and you said you're trying to be a blue collar artist. And I'm guessing we come from families that, we didn't have a grand piano parlor and gilt frame portraits of our ancestors on the walls. My
Correct.
dad was an automobile mechanic. My mother was a seamstress. My brother, my 5 years younger, he's carpenter and mechanically inclined. And what we all have in common, we're all tool freaks because I have every art supply known to the human race. But that's it. It's not like, we went to see the symphony on Sundays, or we discussed uh, Marxist, Zionist, politics at the kitchen table. And
I feel like Dean might have.
yeah,
my
well,
hands are definitely softer than Don's, and maybe even softer than Vito's, to be honest. Like I didn't have, we were what was called middle class, I want to say, back when there was a middle class in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And my dad had a bunch of little jobs working at like movie little shops or whatever, and then wrote uh, articles about Hollywood blonde bombshells for Films and Review and the Big Reel, but it wasn't a moneymaker. My mom was the one who basically brought home the bacon when she eventually became deputy director for the New York State Council of the Arts. So arts was around us a lot. And if we went to the symphony, it was because we were gifted tickets, like uh, I'm sure we could afford some of that stuff, and I didn't grow up poor. I'm poor now. I didn't grow up poor, but I wasn't rich. But when you're in New York City or any kind of city with culture, the riches is the culture. If you
Right.
can even hang out with people who make things, is there's art and entertainment in that as well, and what you absorb, you know.
Vito, does this is this all he does is brag about
The very first
how many of
episode,
these have you done?
this is
How many of these?
this is number 17. The very first episode, I asked
Oh
Dean the
my
question,
God.
do you think you're better than me? Because he grew up in Manhattan and I grew up in Staten Island, New York before I moved out to Fort City and Katanning area in high school. So I was just like, like Staten Island is always considered like the bastard child of New York City, but
But
Manhattan
but
is like Manhattan.
but and the
Am I
technical
better? Am
answer,
I better than you? Am I better? I want to answer you in this way. Come on.
no, the technical answer is yes. But of course, I'm not better than Vito.
Because he's had access to the things that maybe on Staten Island I would have to take a ferry, then a bus and a train to get to. He could
Right,
just walk
right,
to. That's
right.
that's I think what our answer ended up being.
But to remove the monocle and the ascot and the pipe from the proletariat um, cartoonist. I guess the nerd question, you've probably been asked this, and then I want to get to the other stuff that's more about you, is if you could write and draw one DC and or Marvel property, what would that be?
Who's stronger, Hulk or Thor?
There you go.
Thor's invincible, but he's kind of smart, and that makes him weaker than the Hulk, who's like a pure
Exactly. And you piss
savage
off the Hulk.
mind.
Yeah, you piss off the
And
Hulk,
he's
he only
like,
gets stronger,
yeah,
right?
I well, the DC comics that most made sense to me would be the ones that like Green Lantern, Gil Kane, just because I understood Gil Kane's Spider-Man. I had less affinity. I mean, I got to, I don't know how we got on this subject, but I learned the respect of, Mike Sikowski and Wayne Boring, and certainly there was a lot of Murphy Anderson when I was growing up. So I Kurtzwan Murphy Anderson team on Superman and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff that I respected at DC. I think a lot of my problem with DC was that it had been around for so long and nobody had aged.
Hmm.
And uh, I also grew up on the TV shows.
Right.
Adam West Batman and then Superman reruns, Reeves, Christopher Reeve. I was getting confused, but and Green Hornet and stuff like that. But and going from, I remember, and I left this out. One of the earliest comic books I can remember getting, we go down to Cobo Hall to see Santa Claus, Christmas time, and we get a coverless comic. And I remember getting a red and blue Superman story and a Candor Bottle City
Oh yeah.
story. And I'm looking at Jor-El, and I'm thinking, this isn't like the TV show. I don't get this. This isn't like the cartoon. Um, I had the same problem when I tried to read Planet of the Apes and the movies, and you go read Peter Boole, or you read Frankenstein in the movies, and you try to read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and he's like he's more literate, he's more Monocle and Ascot
Right.
than Dean. I mean, it's like, so I always had there were always these barriers, which I've since overcome. But I don't know if that answers your question. There was something I wanted to
Well, you
address
said
about.
Gil Kane. You would maybe want to do Green Lantern, which is I wouldn't have thought that. I would have thought Fantastic Four or
Well,
think of a
there is
Superman.
a class uh, dimension to all this. I don't I don't know. There's not too many people who've made it in comics and cartooning who are from the upper crust. Maybe Colleen Durant. I don't know. And she'll probably slap me next time she sees me. But
Or Dash Shaw. I don't know. Maybe.
oh, okay, I saw him talk once, but I don't know. I mean, it's basically a blue collar profession. I remember I taught a workshop back in the late 90s, and I had a bunch of kids, and it was a couple things were interesting. They were all like 8 to 12. And at the time, they didn't read Marvel or DC or Image. They read like their favorite books of all of them. So like they read Spawn and Batman and Spider-Man. And that was interesting. They didn't care about universes. But the other thing that was interesting about this group of kids is that I think I got the impression, even though this was a rather more upscale part of town and a more upscale kind of a cultural center, it's Sweetwater Center for the Arts in Sewickley,
Hmm.
um, which was a little more the posh part of the town.
Right.
But I just got the impression that these were the kids that couldn't afford the Xbox.
Mm.
And so they got comics. And I got that impression. I'm sitting here and I'm looking at a couple things hanging on my wall that are reminiscent of Ed Piskor. And Ed Piskor, I mean, the most blue collar guy you could think of. And I think that's a whole can of worms, but I think class had a lot to do with. There's a certain element of comics, the establishment, the critically acclaimed people that kind of look down their nose at the kid from Lone Hall, the blue collar kid. I thought there was a very strong element of that. I'll have to blog about that sometime.
Mm.
And even some racism, because after all, Ed did rap music. I think there was some class resentment, in all of that a year ago. That's a whole different subject. We'll get into that next time we see each other. But
We could devote a whole episode, and just to give you a heads up, I think one of the things that happens in all our podcasts between me and Vito is somehow Jack Kirby shows up or gets mentioned at least once. And I would almost hazard Ed Piskor probably gets mentioned more than any other cartoonist we talk about, Vito.
Other than Kirby.
And
Yeah.
other than Kirby and Don, I like, and I've said this to your face, I truly appreciate the deep dive that you did in trying to understand and reconcile what happened with Ed Piskor, and I'm still dealing with that as well. Like I think we all are.
well, he left a big hole, and I'm sitting here, and I have on the wall. This is just a little card they gave out at the memorial service,
Mm, mm,
and it's a collectible. I should have this slabbed.
mm.
I should have got a cup. I should have got a couple of these.
I feel like he'd appreciate
But
saying that.
if you, I couldn't. It was a personal thing with the family and so forth. But they had a little, and I have a couple other things. I have my badge from Eddie P. Con hanging over here. I have a pirate cap. The pirate cap is hanging
Mm.
right there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he left a big hole. Not just in Pittsburgh. He left an enormous hole because he had achieved success. And I watched those guys. I knew Ed before he broke in. He must have come to me at some local show, 2000, maybe early 2000s. The next time I saw him was at the Chrome retrospective in 2004 at the Carnegie Museum of Art. He was hard scrabble. He was blue collar. He was unpretentious. He was determined to learn craft and get better. And he wasn't. I've never been able to pick the winners and losers among all those kids that come up to you with sketchbooks and I want to break into comics. Well, so do I. 63. I don't. But he worked his ass off.
In a way,
And,
you were kind of his Keith Pollard.
well, I think that's all
What a
I was like.
It's always the gold. It's the golden moments, right, Vito?
Yeah,
The
like
local
it's
guy
like,
that did it, and
we
we never
lost
we
you.
were never
We
that
lost you
close.
then.
We were never. Well, I think you mentioned Keith Pollard, and I think that's what I was. I was not like Keith Pollard wasn't my favorite artist necessarily. He was just doing what I wanted to be doing, and he lived in a drive,
right.
45-minute drive from my house. And I would see Ed, and I was like the local guy that did it. And it's not that he was that I was the biggest influencer or that he wanted to emulate my career or my style or storytelling or anything, but that was just this that showed that we, they walk among us, and yeah, so he should be, sorry about that, he should be he should be mentioned. He should be kept alive in our thoughts because him and Kirby, so there's no harm in
Absolutely.
that.
Well, I appreciate it and thank you for that. To veer a little bit differently, and then we'll eventually get to multi-mentions, but like it took Marvel Comics to create the Marvel Universe. And you're a one-man band. You have created your own Marvel Comics, man. Like you are like an IP machine. Even if you're just doing one panel, you have designed and created a premise and a character over and over again, like through Bizarre Heroes with Megaton Man. What is this appetite you have? What is going on?
Well, if you have this, if you
Uh-huh.
read the back matter, there's my wordy PhD dissertation here in the back.
You didn't have to publish your
All
thesis like that, Don.
Oh, doesn't that count as
Oh,
academic scholarship?
I guess.
Um, Fantagraphics, well, they aspire to be academic publisher. Um, I think the people of my generation, I mean, Ron Friends was an exponent of how to draw comics the Marvel way, and he actually he actually did it. He actually got work at Marvel. He's about 8 years older than me, but he's like the chief exponent of how to draw comics the Marvel way. There's probably examples of the tryout book.
I think Mark
I don't know who
Bagley.
those would be.
Mark
Yeah, maybe
Bagley who
Mark
did
Bagley would be.
yeah.
But I was like, you how to draw comics the Marvel way, plus Gary Ock, the Masters of Comic Book Artwork, and the Comics Journal, and film art houses, and so forth. Lots of different influences. Uh, I forgot what we were talking about.
Oh,
Just how you've created your own universe without having to, I don't want to say slug it,
So,
but you didn't have to go, working at Marvel to create something for their IP. You just created your own universe.
his own Marvel Comics
Yeah.
and
well,
DC Comics.
I think all of us, of people identify my generation, people like Bissett and Veitch and Alan Moore and Kurt Busiek and the Big Bang comics, and I talk about all that in the back matter of X amount of comics. Is that we all grew up with this universe idea. We all grew up with multiple artists drawing the same characters. We all grew up with crossovers and team-ups. Uh, if you look at the multi-mentions, uh, most of the stories follow some kind of reference to Marvel team-up. Like the covers. We do fake
Hmm.
covers that are like, mash-up adventures and so forth, and they're very very formatted like a Marvel team-up comic, because that was the era I was growing up in. But we all kind of internalized this idea of universes, even though, um, even though, if you look at the early DC comics, they were patterned on the newspaper feature. Batman was a feature. It was a world of its own. Gotham City was a separate reality. Superman, Siegel and Schuster, Metropolis, that was a separate reality. And I never realized this because I haven't spent a lot of time looking at reprints of stuff, but Superman, Batman would appear on World's Finest on the covers together, but they never actually teamed up until like 55, 57.
Hmm.
And under the under the who's the editor
Julie
from that
Schwartz? No.
period? Yeah, Julie Schwartz. Under Julie Schwartz, is like, why aren't we teaming these? Let's have a team. Let's have crossovers. But these weren't conceived together. And Wonder Woman is in its own idiom, its own style. Flash, Hawkman, they all have their own. They're all like independent feature, like newspaper features. And newspaper features could never cross over, even if they were from the same syndicate, because different newspapers in the same town would have different, they'd be competing with one another. They have different features from different syndicates. So you couldn't have Mandrake teaming up with, Blondie, because that was in the paper across town or something. But the DC thing, we got used to seeing all these different, and it's not the original artists. This is the interesting thing about multi-mentions. It's the original artists aren't the ones doing the team ups. it's like, John Buscema, John Romita, guys like that who could take Ditko and Kirby and kind of homogenize it into something in between.
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
or Steranko. Steranko had such an overwhelming style, and he could take, Ditko, Everett, all these uh, the originals, but he had his own style, and they all seemed to be compatible under his style. John Buscema, and then later on. So now we're used to it. Um, so now we're used to seeing all these, we're used to seeing Spider-Man and Captain America and the Submariner and the Human Torch and Nightcrawler and all these different, but they really don't belong together.
Well,
It's only
actually, no.
because
I would argue one thing. I think you're right about DC Comics having been born in different cities and islands and areas of the world. But 1961's Marvel Comics, the premise behind it was not only to celebrate and exploit the flawed hero, but also to put it in real spaces. And a lot of those characters lived in New York City, until there was like a California character or something. So
Hulk
they
was in
were
the
in
desert.
like, yeah, Hulk's in the desert, Doctor Strange's on Bleecker Street, the Fantastic Four in Midtown, the Spider-Man's in Queens, so that was part of the attraction of that. And I think that resonated with a lot of readers because they felt like, oh, I could see Spider-Man down my block, maybe, or he lives down my block, or he's downtown, or they're downtown, or whatever. And DC had to figure out a way to kind of put them all together. I remember when I was watching, I think it was Superman versus Batman, the movie by Zack Snyder, and I forget who was playing Lex Luthor, but
Jesse
like
Eisenberg.
Jesse Eisenberg is messing with one of the guys. I can't remember if it was Batman or Superman. It might have been Superman. And he's looking across the river, and apparently across the river from Metropolis is Gotham.
Yeah.
And it was like spookier with lightning and all kinds of stuff. And like he's like, you're gonna have to go over there to fight Batman in order, whatever the story was, right? And I thought, oh, that's interesting. It's like that was a funny way of getting them a little bit closer to each other, because I don't know. It was Denny O'Neil that I think said that in his imagination, Metropolis was above 14th Street in New York, and Gotham was below 14th Street. That was his like geographical equator line. Um, but that was really interesting, and it just fascinates me how you created so many heroes, and you continue, I think, to do that to this day. And there's a similarity. I don't know if you know this about Vito, Don, but Vito also creates thousands of characters to the point where he's giving them away. Can
Yeah.
you can you talk a little bit about that, Vito?
Yeah, I a couple of years ago there was a 30 characters in 30 days challenge. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I'll try it. I'll give it a shot. So I did the 30, and then I just decided to keep going till I got to 100. And then when I got to 100, I put them all in the Creative Commons in the public domain, just to, as Mark Waid said in his, I think, Baltimore Comic Con keynote speech, he's like, we're not adding anything to the culture. We just keep taking and taking. So I figured, all right, I'm going to add to the culture my way. I'm just going to put these characters out there. But it's funny because like we're doing this experiment on the show where we're trying to create an IP like collectively between Dean, myself, and a couple other artists that we know. And the ideas I'm trying to impart upon the viewer and the listener how creation happens, like how like we get inspired by one word, or like maybe the premise of the story inspires a character or whatever. So it's just a fun exercise. And then at one point, Dean's like, "You got so many characters, you should just start making video games." And so it's just I don't have half your talent, Don. If I could draw, I'd probably be able to put any of these things out there, but like I can't draw for anything.
I was just looking. It's night has fallen, and in the background of Dean's window, I can see this reflection of a mask. And I'm wondering if you should start burning some coffee in that apartment. It's very spooky and unsettling.
This is my Red Hook studio that I share with Whitney Matheson and my best friend Mike Houston. and other studio mates in the past. And every episode we've done so far, that mask is reflecting. And I think you're the only person to mention it, Don. Like I don't even think Vito's mentioned it yet.
I mean, I know it's there. I mean, I remember you wearing it for a party or something.
I have worn it, and it is creepy. It's just wrong.
You just
Um,
reminded me. You just reminded me. I used to love the Adam West Batman, but my mom, she wouldn't let me watch because the Riddler really upset me. It's like
upset
6 years
you?
of, yeah, the Riddler just really upset me.
Well, he killed
And
Jill
she
St.
said, "Well,
John
I
in the
can't."
first two episodes, I think.
Just his laugh, Frank Ocean's laugh, and
Yeah,
that's
there's a lot
just
going on with Frank Gorshin. Yeah, that's
that
messed up.
mask is.
Well,
But
I know
what the
you have.
thing I wanted to say,
Yes,
was that we've all kind of internalized, and that's the whole point. We've
yes,
all learned to make avatars.
Hmm.
Like I don't
absolutely.
have,
Good way to put it.
I don't have to. Frank Miller is like maybe the last guy. Poor Frank. He gets a Batman idea, and he has to deal with DC. Um, but the rest of us, we're content with just like, I do Tyranno Man instead of Batman, or I do, you know, uh, Megaton Man instead of Captain America, Superman. I do the Human Meltdown instead of the Human Torch. And I do it in a more comedic vein, but this is the same thing as what Alan Moore was doing in 63. Veach with Brat Pack and Max Immortal. Um, the Big Bang guys, all of their Ultiman and so forth, Night Watchman and so forth. And I was just looking at Dean's script, and he's got spit
Oh,
all for super.
wait, you're gonna have to repeat that, Don. Hold on, Don. We lost you again. It's that Pittsburgh
Boy, he's got
Wireless.
Sea Girl
Wait,
something.
wait,
Oh,
wait. We
we
lost you,
can
Don.
we can
You're gonna have to start over. Sorry. Spit Curl, you said?
1961. I was born.
That's when you were born. That's right. No, but
So
what
we
Don is mentioning is a project that I got stuck in my head. That a script that I started writing. It was going to be a couple of pages or a cover or a pinup or something to do as a something for his multi-mentions book possibly.
right.
And then I got lost and I wrote a 20-page script that I just sent to Don today actually. So that he has yet to read.
But I mean, again, referring to X amount, these are my parody characters of Alan Moore's parody characters of Marvel Comics groups. So the Cyclopster is my version, so I don't have to ask Steve Bissette, pretty please, for his permission to do N-Man. And we've worked together on N-Man. He has an unpublished N-Man story that I did. Here's like a patriotic character. So we can. I've got a spidery bug character, the Black Bug, and I do it in a satirical or a comedic vein, but I'm doing the same thing as these other people, and it's like you get, when you read Red Hook, when you read Dean's work, you can figure out, this is a kind of a Hulk, a little bit of Thor, and it's and we don't have to work with Mark Waid or Jim Shooter or be inked by somebody, or we don't have to deal with the work for hire or the
Well, and
everybody
you're speaking to the auteur in yourself that's creating comics, right? Because I do have a tough time trying to figure out my Batman story, my Superman, even my Fantastic Four story, because I understand and respect that it's part of a bigger tapestry, and it's going to have editorial looking at it and fans that are going to tell me what I did wrong. I mean, I remember once listening to an interview with Quentin Tarantino, and they knew that he was a fan of Luke Cage from Marvel Comics, and they're like, "Have you written a Luke Cage script?" And I don't remember what the answer was, but he said he would never make a Luke Cage movie because all the fans would tell him what he did wrong. So he creates his own characters, and you cannot like Kill Bill and all the characters, or characters from, you know, Reservoir Dogs, whatever, Pulp Fiction, but you can't say what he wrote and directed was wrong, you know, in terms of what they did as characters. So, you know, I think that's an interesting way to address, you know, partially being a fan of other comic books and other universes while creating your own, you know, and just constantly coming up. I mean, you are, again, I'm astounded at the amount of creativity that has come from your mind and hands. Yeah, and actually, there's something you have mentioned twice now that I wanted to bring up real quick, which the coverless comic book. Now, if I'm correct, the reason why the covers were not on those comic books is because if you were trying to return comics that didn't sell, you didn't have to send the whole comic book back, just the cover. Right. So that meant there was a ton of comic books without covers that kids could get basically for free, I guess. Right. I mean, I don't think
they were supposed to be destroyed by the retailer, and these were drugstores and newsstands and grocery stores, and these were not comic book shops. These were people that sold crossword puzzle books and magazines and Time magazine and newspapers and so forth. So, you know, on the streets of New York, you had newsstands and subways and so forth. In the Midwest, you had drugstores, grocery stores, party stores, which was a place to get beer and cigarettes.
Yep.
So the you know, the vendor would have, you know, tales of something on sale. Then it was time to return it. They would tear off the cover, or they would tear off the top third of the cover with the title, the markings, and you were supposed to destroy the rest of the comic, and it would save on shipping costs. And of course, you know, these piles of comics, you could still read them. And that's why if you look at the indicia of these comic books, it says if you know, it's unlawful, blah, 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 to have you know, but they would end up, they sweep these all up and they put them in plastic bags and sell 3 for 25 cents. I just picked up something with like just the top third of the cover torn off.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've seen many of those back in the day. I've seen many of those. And you mentioned another term that I had never heard of or remembered hearing until tonight, and I want to do something with it. One of the things that me and Vito talk about, and I may have even mentioned this to you, Don, is a certain group of creators where we have and this was kind of partially what inspired the script I sent you today, was this idea of having crossover characters, kind of like what you do with multi-mentions, where you have a lot of characters that are, you know, crossover with your characters. And you use the term newsstand superheroes. And I just love the idea because it's the idea of nostalgia, newsstand, that doesn't really exist anymore. And when you say newsstand superhero, I know what that means. To me, that's how I was first introduced to superheroes, was from the newsstand, you know, in the Upper West Side. And I think a lot of us went to newsstands to get our superheroes. And there's something to that. And I don't know if anybody's used it or not yet, but I would love to maybe talk further off podcast about the idea of doing some kind of newsstand superheroes comic series.
You've stolen enough ideas from me, Dean. We're through. I have to have my lawyers done everything.
Oh boy.
I had a comma in there. I think newsstand, comma, superhero.
Is that what? Okay.
You've created something new, a newsstand superhero comic, which is an interesting term. But I was just thinking like newsstand, work for hire, corporate owned, assembly line. Those are interchangeable.
Maybe the superheroes emerge from the newsstand, like that's their base. It's like their doorway, you know, to their secret headquarters.
But I wanted to say that I've given up on. Here's the funny thing about, especially the last 10 years I've been doing shows. I went off 96. I disappeared. After I got out of prison, Dean, hence the coffee. Um, what? Old habits are hard to die. I'm up to my old tricks, but anyway, they'll never find the bodies. Um, the last 10 years doing shows, I've had a lot of people come up to me, and I've gotten more conservative and I've gotten less innovative, and we talked about the page layouts. But I can do blindfolded now. I can do like a Marvel House style 1972 comic book. I finally learned how to do that. And I can exaggerate it and make it funny, like little Jack Davis and little Crumb. I can do it really serious straight.
Jim
And
Starlin.
a lot of my commissions are like people want they want the mid-60s X-Men, or they want something from that era. I've never been hired to draw those things by the New York powers that be. But I've sold a lot of, I've done a lot of Spider-Mans and things, and a
Well,
couple
I
new
mean, but you have a
pages and
vintage,
so
you
forth.
have a vintage style. It's almost classic, I'd say. You have a
But
classic
the
style.
point I want to make is that I have complete creative freedom. I don't have to. Um, it's just me. It's
Mm,
I access the 14-year-old. Is
mm,
the point I'm trying to make. I can just be, go back to like the indoor recess from 1974, and the rainy indoor recess where I was drawing in ballpoint pen and I was trying to get those webs to work.
mm,
And I can just go back to that, and I'm not having to, I didn't have to listen to DeFalco or Shooter or Dick Giordano or any of those, Mark Grunewald, the continuity cop, or anything. I could just imagine and be free and do my thing. And people are paying me to do that.
mm,
So that's one thing I would say about the newsstand superheroes, is that we have this weird world that we live in where we can go to shows and people can commission us and people are spending money. I don't know about Trump's recession, but people have been spending money on and I'm vintage. Thank God.
mm.
So I have people commissioning me to draw the Cockrum X-Men, who was the Werner Roth X-Men, the Kirby X-Men, um, and so forth. And I don't know anything about the continuity of these characters, and
Mm.
I'm a stuffy, snobby auteur, but I've also mellowed, and it's like this is a lot of money, so it
Yeah.
could pay the rent. But that was the point I wanted to make on that.
Well, you've always presented as autonomous. You have had an autonomous career, basically, and that's something to truly admire. And like people like me and Vito, I think, look up to that, because
Absolutely.
we're striving for that. So I know that you have a hard out soon, Don. You probably want to take a breather before you hop onto another thing in a half hour. Before we do that,
Not really.
uh,
No, I
I
don't
do
care.
want I do want to end on multi-mentions, but before I do that, we can do a quick. I have a couple of questions. We can do quick round questions. We maybe just have a one-word answer or one sentence, unless you want to elaborate. You ready? All
All right. I'm sure I will, but
right, here we go. Al Franken collaboration.
yeah, that was great. The widest scene thing I've ever done. It has to be a couple million copies in print.
Do you know about this, Vito?
Yeah, I do.
He
What was the title again,
hasn't
or
he,
the basic title?
he hasn't returned my emails lately, but he's got other things to do. And yeah, I take credit for him becoming a U.S. senator. So,
Oh, excellent, excellent. All right.
but I also
Well,
take credit for Matt Groening and The Simpsons, because he laughed his ass off when he read Megaton Man. He's the Simpson. That's a funny.
and he was like, "I want to do something funny."
Oh, it's a funny family name. He didn't know my family, but
That's right. And then another one.
That's a succinct one-word answer.
That was good. All right, how about this? And I know the answer to this, but maybe our listeners don't. And I think Vito knows this. Who is Anton Drek and what did he do?
Here we go. Funny enough, that was one of mine. But all right.
The funny thing was there were these characters in the early Megaton Man called the Partiers from Mars, and I have a little diminutive elf character. He's got pointy ears. He's a kind of like Prince Michael Jackson elf quest dude, and I called him Anton Drek. And this would have been in 85, 86 before the Wendy Whitebread didn't come out till like 90. So, but yeah, it's just I always thought Tony Tony was a great name, and Anton it's just pretentious. It's a little monocle and Ascot.
Little monocle Ascot action.
Yeah. Drek, Anton Drek.
And what did Anton Drek do, or most known for?
Well, we call it in those days I would have called it porn, but now I call it erotica because I do wear a monocle ordinarily.
And you have a PhD.
And I have a PhD. And I have a piano in the parlor and so forth.
You have a guitar behind you. I didn't know you play guitar.
He plays them at the show. I'm surprised.
Banged the hell out of it. I chipped it. But yeah, I have I'm working on my pentatonic scales.
Oh,
I'm working
boy.
on my
So Vito, did you have a question before I get in
this I mean I do it might be a little bit too long to get into the answer, but
okay.
Knowing that you worked with Alan Moore, are his scripts as unbearable as I think they are?
I'll send you a PDF.
Okay. Because I can't imagine like as an artist. I'm not an artist, but I can't imagine as an artist getting the assignment, just being excited. Yeah, I get to work with Alan Moore, and then getting like one full page type that's just one panel, or something to that effect. So it's very like I'm so interested in that. Like it just I can't. I have this weird like in my scripts, I tend to be, and I think Dean, you could speak to this too. I tend to be somewhere in the middle of being descriptive and being sparse. Like there's a Jeff Loeb version, which is sparse to the point of just writing one sentence, and then there's the Alan Moore version, which is just writing everything. And I think I'm somewhere in the middle there, but like I can't imagine how hard it is to penetrate that as someone visualizing something. So that was really my only question. Really was just like how. Uh-oh.
Well, no, I mean, this is my
Yes.
my little statement. But that's only later. That was just because he's
For listeners, Don
he's
pulled
a
a
wonderful.
That said, "Fuck Al."
Affable Al Moore. Well, that's
Affable.
only because creating.
Don is like a radio
He's
DJ.
dying. Don is dying. Dying Donald Simpson.
Emphysema. It's that 6 packs a day. No, that's only owning something with Al. Owning IP with Al is not the bed of roses. But as far as creating, reading his script, I think exactly the opposite. You read his script, and then you have all his ideas in your head, and then it's up to you to draw them. And that's far preferable. In fact, I felt spoiled. That was the first script that I worked on. I mean, I can think up my own crap. Right. I still do. And I can have enthusiasm for it if I can keep it straight. I can write down things that make only sense to me. But when you would read like, and he would literally go a page and a half for like one page of comics, and but to read all that, and he would talk about, he would talk about things like there's a mask hanging and you see the reflection in the window and you smell the burnt coffee, and you would hear like that would be an Alan Moore script.
Right.
And you'd say, how the fuck am I supposed to draw this? But that's a better problem than most comic book scripts are like close up, long shot,
Right.
and you're kind of, I liken them to a recipe, but you don't know what you're making. You don't know if it's a cake or muffins or
I like that.
chop
Yeah.
suey. And I wish people would come out and say, like, this is my meta theme. Like Dean, for example, he's got spit curl and he's got this, this, that, and the other. Like, tell me, give me a high concept, couple sentences. Tell me where this is going.
I could. I kept my script pretty spare. But
I'm
there's
gonna
a
have
lot
to
of
read it
ideas.
5 times before I'm gonna have to read it 5 times before I figure, oh, okay, this is where he's going, and this is what he wants. But I mean, Alan Moore, the way Alan Moore writes is like, this is what I want the reader to be thinking, and I'll let you in on what, here we're fooling the reader, or here we're creating this expectation.
Yeah.
He's not trying to play to me. He's not trying to keep me in suspense, because I don't need to be kept in suspense. I'm trying to pencil this fucking thing and turn it in. And so, spoiler alert, you don't have to worry about. But I think a lot of conventional script writing is like you're part of the audience. First time you read it, you're just trying to, oh, I don't know who's behind the next door,
Right.
I wonder where this is going, and so forth. And that I find I'm more impatient with that.
I forget who said it, Vito and Don, but maybe it was Vito. Who was telling me that when they write a script for an artist, they're trying to excite the artist to draw what they want. Like they're trying to get them.
I try to.
I think you may have said that.
I always try to do that. I always try to. Number one, I always try to find the right artist for the project. And then if I find the right artist, I want to make sure that they are as excited about working with me as I am working with them. The other part is I generally start all my scripts thinking that Dean's going to draw them, because he was the first person I ever collaborated with. So my brain just automatically thinks in terms of the language that I would use with Dean, and hope
like a PTSD, right?
Basically, like Stockholm syndrome. Yeah.
Like. All right, so we only have a few minutes because I'm worried for Don, who probably has to like cough his guts out before he gets onto another podcast. But
fuck Billy Tucci. Yeah. It was nothing when I met him. He still ain't nothing. He thinks he's better than me. Oh, give me a break. He can wait.
Wow, I like it.
I'm talking to Dean and Vito.
That might be the quote under our title this week.
Actually, I might have the quote besides.
Yeah.
Well, I like that idea that, and I've been writing down notes here, stealing, I guess. But that you said it's like sometimes a script can be a comic book recipe, right? But then you mentioned muffins, cake, and chop suey. It's like you can either be making muffins, cake, or chop suey. That's what a comic book script does. So
I feel that way, and you listen. And Dean's from the theater. You've read a lot of you've read like Long Day's Journey into the Night, and you've read Shakespeare. I saw it, and it seems like scripts are like if you read those, they're edited to be kind of reading experiences for the reader.
I think
you're supposed to be turning the pages and you're wondering, who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? I don't know how this is going to end. But I think a real working script for the theater would be like, you get your actors together and say, here's what we're going. You don't keep these people in suspense. You don't keep them like, you're not going to find out until you read the last page, what's going on. You just
yeah.
It seems to me that, well, but
I'll say I've I've found reading screenplays are easier in a way than reading a play because I feel like a lot of playwrights tend to bury the lead big time. So they're talking about all kinds of stuff. You're like, what are they talking about? And then eventually something is revealed through,
As
a
a
second or
method,
third act. Or
like,
not necessarily as a method, but like there's a lot of like jargon, I think,
mm,
in playwriting.
got it.
Whereas in screenplay writing, you got to get to the point a lot quicker.
Right.
Scenes are shorter. And so every time, every scene, if you can pull the scene out of the movie and the movie still works without it, then you cut that scene. So that all scenes seem to be very necessary in a movie, whereas in a play, I think there's more indulgence. Okay. And I would also hazard that comic book writing usually is is a good in between screenplay writing and playwriting, because of what the art can do. And then the reason why you have characters talking or you have text over fight scenes is because a 3 or 4 page fight scene, you can 1, 2, 3, boom, 5 seconds, it's done.
Right.
And you just saw people hitting each other or whatever happens. Whereas the text slows it down, the fight scene,
It's funny because you
so
mentioned the difference
look,
between.
look, it's Don Simpson is
You
learning
could now
about how to make
see.
comics.
See, you could have cut this from here to.
I know, I know.
But what you were
You
saying
just
about
wanted to. You just
plays and
wanted. You
screenplays.
just wanted to. You just wanted to draw a brick wall there.
That talks. No,
And this, like, and this is, this. We don't need this.
we don't need that. Not at all. No,
You know,
absolutely.
cut that.
But
Cut
but
that beat.
that's a screenplay production cost. Whereas in a theater, you just light it a certain way. The end. All right. So multi mentions, Megaton Man multi mentions is your current live Kickstarter that almost didn't happen. Why? Because you had 60 contributors. I like to say 60 plus because I'm sure there was other hands somewhere sneaking behind all that. And there were 4 pages in the book created by an artist that lives in Iran
Milo Trent,
and
I believe.
got what's his name? Milo
Milo Trent.
or Milo? It's Milo or Milo. Do you know? Nobody knows, right?
I'm
You've never
Italian. I
met him.
say Milo.
There was this smell, and I couldn't get rid of it until I started burning some coffee,
No.
and then everything cleared up.
Everything cleared up, and then
People,
and then
people were nosing around. I've taken care of that.
so
They were
so
getting too
you
close.
so rather than like because Kickstarter then flagged it and said we put a halt to the project, and then you reached out during Easter weekend and said, hey, what's up with that? And did not get a response for a couple of days at least, I don't think. And also with Eli Schwab, who's the publisher from Cosmic Lion, and there was this little kerfuffle. And what's admirable about you is you didn't like decide, oh well, I want to move forward. We'll pull the 4 pages out. You decided, no, of course, we're keeping the 4 pages in by this artist. What the hell is wrong with everybody just because the guy lives in Iran? And so then it became what, like a money issue? Like, how do you pay out? And so I don't really know ultimately what happened, except it course corrected. The project is being published, and with the help of crowdfunding and kickstarting. And Vito is making a face that I cannot understand. What is he doing right now?
I want to tell you the story my wife is telling me about my son, but I might have to do it off air because I don't want to scar my son for the rest of his
Or
life.
when he sees this audio. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So Donald, can you talk a little bit about the project, what it is, and what happened, and where you're at right now with it?
I can neither confirm nor deny your fanciful explanation that you've completely invented based on the problem is we didn't know what we had done wrong.
Right.
Except that they gave it away. They said they came back to us. Usually now, see, I'm new to crowdfunding, and this is all Eli Schwab, Cosmic Lion Productions. He's the veteran. But they came back and they said, well, Eli says, well, it's usually usually right away we get approval. And but they came back and they said, "What? We have a couple questions. What dealings do you have with people, entities in Iran?" And of course, I said, "Well, yeah, we're passing nuclear secrets, isn't everybody? What, that's why I have guitars on the drawing board." Um,
Be
it was
careful,
just
it's called
crazy,
Megaton.
but that that's
Helo
it.
is a weapon of mass
And
destruction.
some guy is trying to build a nuclear warhead. Well, so we didn't know what we had done, except that they had, obviously their question was the clue. But yeah, we have a cartoonist who lives in Tehran, and over the course of 2024, I'm talking to this guy, and he happens to be one of my favorite contributors. But even he's brilliant. He was in Big Bang Comics. He was in Giant Size 63, both published by Cosmic Lion. But even if he wasn't my favorite cartoonist, if it was just one of my crummy cartoons or somebody else, it was still like the only thing was that he lived. We mentioned I was proud because we got people in Peru, we got people in Argentina, we got people in Canada, United Kingdom. Alan Davis is in the United Kingdom. Trish Ellis is in Canada. Joaquin Pereira is in Argentina. Bruna Costa is in or she's in South America somewhere. But we had this international roster, and I mentioned it in the story. And apparently their algorithm caught Iran. And during the course of 2024, Vito, your daughter wants
Yep,
to
she
talk
just
to
walked in.
she's spooked by Dean's mask.
Which is my face.
So during 2024, I'm talking to text and email. Dan Shaheen is out in the Bay Area of San Francisco, and he writing a couple of scripts. But I'm asking Milo if he can turn in the files, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, "Well, yeah, it's like the only holdup is we're waiting for possibly Israeli bombs descending on our heads." So it was like that just really fascinated me, and I wasn't thinking like, well, this is an enemy nation or this is behind the Iron Curtain or anything like that. And but me and my big mouth, I just mentioned that we've got these people, and people reached out to me. Jeff Trexler at the Comic Book Defense Fund reached out to me and said, "This prohibition should not extend to legally. It should not extend to printed matter or to intellectual property or to you know." And he intervened. He's going to blog about what he did, but he talked to Facebook.
You mean Kickstarter?
Or Kickstarter, one of those tech giants. And yeah, I keep making that mistake. Where's the power button on this thing? So, long story short, it was like Sunday morning, and I'm thinking, oh, nothing's happening on Easter. I'm just going to raise hell. This is old school, Dean. This is, murder suicide, I think was the operative term. I mean,
that's
you just you know what you can set people off. I have a talent for that. That's my real talent. And so I did what I did, and I don't know what did the trick, to be honest with you. I don't know who relented, what argument. They just said, "Hey, good news, we've changed our minds. All better." And so I put out a press release saying, "Great, looking forward to working with you." And
now it's live.
bygones are bygones.
bygones are bygones. It's live.
Yeah.
It's more than halfway funded already in a day or two.
I
I do think there was some optics situation here. You know, obviously, like a lot, you had a lot of contributors that were also spreading the word, and then Bleeding Cool and other news sites got in on it, and it just seemed to be super unfair ultimately. And
yeah.
I
Yeah,
think the came through. You know,
I've had my differences with Rich Johnson over the years, mostly because he's a real Alan Moore fanatic. But I had to confess to him, we've made $1,300 just off of the link from Bleeding Cool. And
Yeah.
he goes, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah." And so
Are you
I just
likely?
want to, but I just want to get these people paid. I don't really. It's First Amendment. We can argue First Amendment. We can argue. I had some person came to me and said, "Well, it's the credit card companies. They're worried. They're terrified. The international financial system. I think the Bourbons and it's like Lyndon LaRouche or something in the conspiracy theories. I don't know how
Crispus
all this stuff
Attucks.
works. The Habsburg Empire." Is still controlling everything. I don't know. I don't care. All I know is there was a guy who loves. He was actually born in British Columbia, Milo. He's living in Tehran for 30 years.
Wow.
He loves American comics. Um, and he's basically working for free because we have no idea how to pay him. Like a
Mhm.
paper airplane, I don't know how to,
Right.
and not just me, but his past several pages he's done for other projects. So
Well, here's a
I don't know
question
what
for
did the
Don.
trick, and I don't know what lessons are learned. I will tell you something funny. I have people coming up to me, they think I'm a miracle worker now. They say, "I've been banned off of Kickstarter. Can you get them to unban me?" And I said, "I don't know how I did it in my case. And I don't know you, I've never heard of you, and I don't know what your issues are with them or their issues are with you. But people now think I'm like, yes, I'm a fearless champion.
The horse whisperer.
I'm going to run for Senate like Al Franken now."
Please get rid of Fetterman for us. Um, I do have a question for you though, Don. Are you more or less likely to work with Kickstarter in the future, or is it still too early to answer that?
I'd like to get this thing succeeded and funded and pay my contributors the measly amount of money that they were promised, which is not much.
Right.
Dino, he didn't talk money, but you're not getting anything. You just keep the pencils there.
Cheers.
I'll buy you a beer or something. No, I I don't know. I don't know if I want to go. I was thinking of just putting the PDF out for free. I don't care. I just want to get the stuff out there. So
Yeah.
I'm not thinking Machiavellian. And I have 60 contributors and Eli Schwab, Cosmic Lion Productions. So I'm really the least important stakeholder in this. So, there's other people. If it were just me, I might have, you know, decided some other course of action, but it's like, oh, they can learn.
Mhm.
Well,
Kickstarter's making nice. And so, okay. If
That's
you need
fair.
every friend you can get, you need every friend you can
Right.
get. So I'm putting up with Dean. Look at me, the mask and the coffee and everything. You overlook behaviors. So I'm gonna have to run, guys. It's 8:53. I got another
yep.
online.
Well, just to repeat, and thanks for talking to us. This has been a
Yeah.
lot of
Thank
fun,
you.
educational, and talking to a legendary cartoonist has been I made yeah. Don't look around.
It
Look
ain't
right at your
me.
own face. But you got your Megaton Man omnibus collecting all the original stuff through Fantagraphics, I believe, or at least a
Yep.
first volume, at least of that, maybe more.
Yep.
You got Bizarre Heroes as well. Is all that stuff coming out in
That
collections?
will be volume 2 from Fantagraphics.
Okay, and then Border Worlds or what? What's going on?
I've got a backlog of stuff, Dean, and I sent you some more. It keeps coming out, so I have more where that came from. Is the
More where that came
phrase.
from. And then
So
more after that, right? Like, I don't know if you have any plans because you're just getting this, crowdfunded multi-mentions, but keep going, man.
Yeah, really.
Keep expanding this universe that you can't help but keep growing constantly. And then you have all these acolytes and people that are willing to take part, man. We're at the crossroads, Don. We're at the crossroads.
that's a good idea.
I do want to
I'll think
mention,
about that.
Don, are you going to be at Three Rivers this year?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so Three Rivers Comic Con is going to be at the David L. Lawrence Convention Center, June 7th and 8th. Come and meet
That
Don.
reminds me, I gotta talk to them about the floor plan.
Oh,
Make a
you
note
want
of
to sit
that.
next to me again? I get it. But you come meet Don, you come meet me. This is my first convention appearance of the year, so I can't wait to see you, Don.
All right,
All
well,
right,
let's
Vito.
do
Thank
this.
you, Dean.
Thank you.
Vito and
We have a
Dino.
tradition. We have a tradition here.
Yes. You ready? Don, I flushed the toilet because my office is in a bathroom. I'm like Fonzie that way. So I'm gonna flush it. You're not gonna hear it, but it
That's
will
cool.
be in the audio. There it is.
There it is. You have been flushed.
That's class. That is class.
That's the Ascot.
Monocle and Ascot.
Ascot.
Oh yeah. You got any state secrets in banker boxes over there?
And bigger bugs.
All right.
Thank you,
All
Don.
right,
We
guys.
appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Thank
We go
you.
our little call, our little goodbye siren.
Yeah, let's do it, Dean. Yay, yay.
Oh, yay, yay.
Have a good night, everybody.